of The Last of the Tasburai. I'd like to introduce Rehan Khan, the author. Rehan was born in Wimbledon in London, close to the lawn tennis and croquet club that everyone's heard of, and a bike ride away from Wimbledon Common. And as a child, he loved listening to swashbuckling tales of heroism and valor, and also dabbling in science fiction. Rehan works for a large corporation, and he's also a professor of management at an international business school, and has written Last of the Tasburai. He lives in Dubai with his wife Faiza and children Yusuf and we're just going to do maybe 10 minutes question and answer, just to give a little bit of background about the book. And I'd like to start off by asking Rehan about, it's obviously an epic fantasy. There's lots of adventure in it, heroic characters, huge set piece action scenes. The main characters, obviously, as you can tell from the title of the Tasburai. Rehan, can you tell us a bit about the Tasburai?
Okay, thank you very much, Imelda, for the very kind introduction, and thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate you coming on a Friday, coming through the traffic in Dubai Mall, getting a parking space and coming up. I really appreciate it. So the Tasburai, now for me, they're very much a cross between Japanese samurai with their code and their bushido, the way of the warrior, and on the other side, Sufi mystics with their emphasis on the tasawwuf, which is purification of the heart. So you get kind of mystical warriors then, right? So for me, the Tasburai are very much kind of an elite, selfless warrior class. And the actual word Tasburai, which is obviously clearly made up, is the first part, Taz, comes from the tasawwuf, and the second part comes from samurai. And so if you do a Google search these days for Last of the Tasburai, it always says, did you mean Last of the Samurai, that Tom Cruise movie? No, actually I didn't, but
Very good. Now, the story, there are 5 main protagonists in the story who are our action heroes. And I was really pleased to see that 3 of the 5 are female characters. Eve actually is a female character. Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Sure, thanks, Imelda. So we've got sort of Aidan, who's on the front cover here, and who's pictured there on the left. So he's a 16-year-old Tasburai apprentice, and he's trying to become an elite warrior. But he's being asked to do certain things which trouble him. He's being asked to arrest innocent people and lock them away. And he's thinking, do I just try and fit in, or do I actually do what I think is right? Okay. A second character we follow is Yilva. Now she's a feisty young thief who is from the very cheerful and hearty kind of forest folk. Now her father sent her to Kronenberg to rob from the rich so that they can redistribute wealth to the poor. But she finds a Tasburai sword. And after that, things start to turn upside down. Does she remain a thief, or does she become someone who's actually going to perhaps change the course of history? A third character that we follow in the story is Rykard. Now he's a young captain of Kronenberg, and he's very much a commoner, and the nobles look down upon him. And he's going to be put in some difficult situations. Will he upset the nobles, or will he rise to the challenge of becoming a leader of his people? A fourth character we follow is Princess Elster. Now she's a very naive young ruler of Kronenberg, and she just wants to get married to her dashing young prince. And as a result, she neglects the plight of her people and doesn't listen to the advice of her father's ministers. So things start to get a little bit tricky for her. And then the final character we follow is on the back cover of the book here, is Surayi, and who's pictured there. So she's about 50 years of age, although she looks in pretty good condition. She's about 50 years of age, and she's a Tasburai grandmaster. And for her, really, she's on a journey of redemption, because she's done some terrible things in the past. and she's trying to become a better person. But she's very fearful that the demon masters, a race of beings called the Magrog, will be turning up at any point in time. And some things that she did about 30 years ago are going to come back to haunt her. So those are the kind of 5 main characters we're following.
And what I really like is that they're all, as you've touched on, they're all slightly struggling between their core values, which are clearly good, but you know, it's not straight black and white. It's not as simple, which is great. But there are some characters in the book who are clearly the villains. But I think in a lot of ways that makes a good story. You know, you've got, I don't know, Professor Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes, and that makes those characters a part of the whole depth of the book. Who are the villains? You mentioned the Magrog, but there are other villains as well, aren't there?
Okay, so you've got essentially sort of 2 main republics, I call them, who are in this place called Aventolia, where really the story takes place. And the 2 republics are kind of trying to export their revolutionary ideas to the kingdoms and overthrow them. So that's kind of, there's a bit of antagonism going on there. Also the Tasburai warriors, now for them what's happened is that they actually have a offshoot from them called the Hawarij. And the Hawarij are these kind of very extreme group, and they're causing the Tasburai to sort of stray from the middle kind of way. And then we've got the Magrog, who are this, as I said, this race of demon masters, and they're always lurking in the background. And what they're doing, they're waiting for all of these states in this place called Aventolia to really just kind of fight it out with each other, and they're watching and waiting, and they're an enemy to all of them. Now, they've then sent some of their Ifrit, who are these kind of fiery demons that produce weapons from their bodies, and they've sent these Zetin, who are these wolf-like mountain men, to go and start terrorizing the people of Aventolia. So I think it's quite a lot to keep our main protagonists quite busy, really.
And you mentioned there Aventolia, and we can get a little sense of it from the cover of the book. And I love the name Aventolia. Is that a real place?
Yeah, so it does sound like Anatolia, doesn't it? It's the old name for Turkey. And it does sound like Anatolia. And Anatolia really is the kind of the inspiration, that particular geography for this book. So with Anatolia, we've got sort of 6 different states. So we have 6 different states in Aventolia. So the first, as I said, we have these 2 republics that are sort of bent on exporting their revolution. And then what I did was that I then created sort of 4 more kingdoms which are themed around cultures that we'd be familiar with. So we have a place called Kronoberg, which is very Scandinavian in its name and its thinking and its language and its people. Then we have 2 states called Duria and Athenia, and they sound Greek, and they're very much like the old Greek city-states. And then we have one final place called Bhakan. Now that's ruled by a Maharaja, and that's obviously the Indian ethnicity of me coming out in the novel there. Because I just thought there wasn't enough, curry being cooked in fantasy novels, so I had to do that. Seriously, there's no chicken tikka masala in the prose, I guarantee that. It's just not going to work. So that's kind of the land that we have, and most of the action takes place in Kronoberg and around there.
And it's quite a complex storyline. There's a lot happening. How do you structure something that's that complex? How does the thought process work in terms of thinking that through and putting it down?
So, some writers, very successful writers like Stephen King, for instance, they write situational stories. So they say, what would happen if a bunch of vampires invaded Little Town America, and that's Salem's Lot? Or what would happen if a guy took his family to a remote hotel, stayed there over the winter, and then went mad, and that's The Shining, right? So that's kind of a situational story. Now, what I try and do is a little bit different, which is much more around creating quite a complex plot. So, creating a very large canvas, and actually when I was working on book 2 over the Christmas period, our sort of bedroom was full of just, you know, post-it notes on the carpet. Okay, looking at really how is the whole story going to thread together? How are the characters going to interweave with one another? Where is the tension in the story? How can I crank up the dramatic tension at particular moments in the story? And I think probably, you know, working in the corporate sector for the last 20 years, a lot of us, and some of the guys from BTA here, they're program managers, you can ask them later on. When you build a big complex program plan, you have to see everything before you start. So I kind of write my stories in that same way. I try and see everything and the flow and the rhythm, and then I start to write, which is perhaps not something most writers do, but then, you know, that kind of works for me. Well, actually, I'll let the readers decide whether it works for me.
And just finally, this idea, this theme that runs through the book about virtues and courage and the struggle that the main characters are going through, the inspiration behind that and that theme running through it, can you just tell us a little bit about that?
So I think for me, you know, Aristotle's four virtues of wisdom, of courage, of temperance, and of justice have always appealed to me. And I wanted to write a story where I could put courage right at the center of the novel, and then say, you know, what does it mean to be courageous in difficult times? Because, you know, Aristotle said that when courage is in the golden mean, when it's in equilibrium, when it's in the middle, then courage manifests itself, it shows itself as valor, as steadfastness, as, you know, as the ability to control your anger, and as kind of being dignified. But when courage goes to the excess, then it becomes recklessness, it becomes quickness to anger, it becomes pride. And when courage goes to the deficit, then it becomes cowardice and it becomes meanness. So it got me thinking, well, how about if I kind of work with that theme of courage and work that out and think about it from the perspective of, what if the best people in a particular society lost their sense of what did courage mean? So rather than becoming dignified, they became reckless, right? What would be the implications for society and for people if the very best, you know, strayed from that balance? And that then led me to the creation of the Tasburai as a sort of elite warrior class who have kind of lost their sense of balance. What does it mean to be courageous? It's not about being dignified and having a sense of valor anymore, but it's about maybe having anger and being reckless and so on. So the story very much, the inspiration very much is about how do we as human beings come back to that golden mean? Because when we're in the golden mean, then there's a lot there that can unite us, and we're all very different. But when we're in the center, we can be very much united. But when you go to an extreme, then that creates divisions. And so for me, the story is very much about courage, but it's also about, you know, what unites people and what divides them as well.
Great, thank you. I think that's given us a taste. If you want to ask more questions to Rehan, when we're going to do a book signing now, and the book signings, and there are plenty of copies available for anybody who wants one. And please feel free to ask more questions. Does anybody have any questions?
You can always rely on me, Rehan. Okay, so when I read a book such as this, and there's some strong characters in it, by the end of the book I think, I'd like to be that character, or that character is the most like me. So when you come to the end of writing a book, and you are pleased with yourself, and you've got all the characters, so regardless of gender, regardless of whether they're the good guys or the bad guys, when you finish writing it, which of the characters do you think, I wish I was that person?
Well, I think I'm going to have to sit on the fence there. All of them.
I assume it's a villain then.
Every character has an arc, right? Yeah. How do they start? How do they begin? So I guess probably as the writer, you put a little bit of you into all the characters. And I think that the hardest thing when you're writing a novel, I'm sure all novelists have this, is getting the voice, you know, the character voice. I think it took me about 2 years just to be able to write like the particular characters I was trying to, you know, come up with. And that's the hardest thing, because if you read a novel and all the characters sound the same, that's pretty boring, right? So that I think is the hardest thing, and that's a little bit of you in every single character.
You can tell me the truth later when no one's listening.
Anyone else?
What makes your book different? How does similar books
So the question is, what makes the book different? Well, I think there's two things. One is it's obviously a fantasy epic, which, like many fantasy epics, it's all about creating, a sense of tension and dramatic tension in a novel. But also, I think what I've tried to do, and I hope it's not being sort of preachy in any way, but I've tried to emphasize the virtue of courage throughout the novel. So that, I hope, comes across throughout. So there is something in there, so when you read it, at whatever age a person is, when they finish the book, they think, okay, I get that kind of, meaning from there. So yes, you get the exhilaration and the thrill of a fantasy epic, but hopefully you walk away with a little bit of a message there as well.
As you wrote the book, were your children involved? Were they like, Dad, you gotta put this in? Anything like that go in the book?
Well, actually, okay, so were my children involved? Okay, well, I should tell you what, about 6-7 years ago, my daughter here, Iman, we were at the breakfast table one day, and she said to me, Daddy, what do you want to be when you grow up? I mean, clearly working in BT, working in an office is not, going to work, right? It's not like you're a fireman or you're an astronaut. You just do some kind of office job, right? So that kind of, propelled me to think, actually, what do I want to do when I grow up, And I thought, actually, I would like to, do what I've been trying to do for many, many years, which is right. So that was the initial inspiration. And then I think as I worked with the story over the couple of years, then clearly Faiza had some input, Iman had some input, and Yusuf had some input as well. But I didn't really share with them the story until it was finished. But I'd often ask them certain things, what do you think about such and such?
Where did you get that inspiration about the Tasburai?
So where was the inspiration from the Tasburai?
Yeah.
Okay, so when I wanted to write a book about courage and a book about what would happen to the people, the best of people, if they kind of strayed from that, then I looked around and thought, well, who are historically who have been individuals or groups of people who I've had some sense of admiration for, and as I said, the samurai with their sort of notions of the Bushido was one. The Sufis with their notion of tasawwuf was another. And I thought, well, what if I put the two together? How would that work? And that's really where the concept of the Tasburai, and that sort of mystical warrior came from.
Writing a book doesn't only take skills, but it also takes sacrifice. Can you tell us a little bit about the personal sacrifice that you have done, because you have your day job? And the other question is, have you hit the writer's block, and how did you overcome it?
Okay, so sacrifice, you better ask my wife, I think.
That's why.
But I think it's a lot of it's about just kind of just structuring your day. So I'm someone who gets to sleep very early. By 10 o'clock I'm kind of out, and I wake up at 5:30 normally, and I get cracking. So for me, I don't want to compromise on the time to the family. It's very much about I have to do it in my own time, really. So I think that's in terms of time, and then in terms of writer's block. Well, so far I haven't had that, and I think when you get stuck sometimes on something, then the best thing is just to walk away. And at work we have this all the time, right? You're working on a problem, it's just stuck, just chill out, walk away, come back, and then probably when you're brushing your teeth or something, it'll come to you, right? Because your subconscious is working. So I think I just do that as well. And I just don't take it too seriously, because ultimately I'm doing it because it's an enjoyment for me as well, as much as hopefully it is for the people who read it.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, everyone. So as I said, said, we'll set up an author's desk here, and anybody who wants to get their copy signed, please come to the front. Thank you. Thanks for coming.